this by the many DAOs that use us and count on us to operate and manage their communities. Teams like Arbitrum or ZK Sync, Wormhole, Uniswap, many others. Tally is the leading governance tooling provider in the space, and we've been thinking for a long time about how we make protocols successful, DAOs successful. And this goes to a part of the sort of like protocol ecosystem that maybe folks don't think about too often, which is incentives. How do we make sure that the governance of these things work properly? How do we make sure that the people inside these systems are properly incentivized? So what I'm going to talk about today is actually the Tally protocol. I'm going to do a little bit of a focus on the financial aspect and the restaking aspect of it, which is kind of topical here. But there's lots of materials online about how we talk about what the advantages are of the protocol for DAOs, for protocols, for the sort of back end of how it works. But today I'm going to sort of focus very high level on what we are trying to solve here. So first up, I think it's kind of important to level set on what we are thinking about, what's really important here. And high level, what we see is that every asset in crypto is going to be staked. Staking has really emerged as the winning use case for crypto, which I think all of you probably buy into that idea. But at a high level, really, everything is collateral, right? Whether you hold some DAO tokens, those DAO tokens are an asset. Those are collateral that could be used in something else, right? Many times you might think, oh, you have a DAO token and you could use it as collateral to get a loan in DeFi, or maybe you could use it as an asset and put it into exchange and sell for money, or you could put it into some sort of bribe protocol where you sell your voting power, right? Either way, at its core, you're essentially leaving money on the table if you don't use your asset as collateral. And a lot of people hold governance tokens as unproductive assets that don't do anything for them, right? And actually, long term, this presents a big problem for DAOs because people don't have any utility on these tokens, and they actually have to actively do something for the DAO, for the protocol itself, which is manage it through governance, and they don't care. So a lot of these assets have a hard time maintaining some sort of value level because they are in this weird flux of not being very productive, right? So something interesting here is going on, which is protocols have figured this out, and they understand long-term that they have to return value to token holders to be successful. And the sort of like watershed moment here is that Uniswap is turning on staking. So what's going to happen with Uniswap is you're going to be able to stake your Uni token in the Unistaker contract, pick a delegate to do some work in the protocol governance aspect, and you will be able to receive a portion of Uniswap's fees, which is extremely exciting, right? And this has really turned on the idea of many different protocols in the ecosystem where they essentially say, hey, if Uniswap can return value to token holders, so can we. What's actually sort of like turbocharged this process is restaking. Because now what you have is previously you may have a governance token, and in many cases governance tokens value is based on a speculative premium. You have a DAO token, you assume at some point in the future this DAO token will give you the ability to turn on fees and will give you the ability to receive a portion of these fees, and therefore the market price of this token today should be X, Y, or Z based on your expectation of some sort of future speculation. Well, that's coming to a close. Now protocol tokens will be valued based on their ability to capture underlying revenue, right? And because of that, these tokens now become very useful in restaking. Right? Previously, people talk about restaking in context of like economic security and Ethereum and Bitcoin, but that's not the only source of economic value in the ecosystem. And maybe I'll jump ahead a little bit here, but I'll ask a rhetorical question, which I like to give to folks. What is more valuable, the internet or all the things built on top of the internet? And if you think this through a little bit, it's pretty clear that everything built on top of the internet is actually vastly more valuable than the internet itself, right? You've got these fiber optic wires, they're very expensive, they're very valuable, but when you add up the value of Google and Facebook and all the SaaS businesses and all the social media and all the networking, you come to realize that the businesses built on top of the internet in aggregate are vastly more valuable than the internet. So this is very related to how we think and should be thinking about the future of staking and restaking, which is Ethereum will always be enormously valuable. But one day, all the things built on top of Ethereum will be vastly more valuable than Ethereum itself. So this is kind of a simple way to think about what the very near future is going to look like. Restaking protocols today, everyone's essentially competing for a share of restaked ETH. And if you think about it, there's actually not that much ETH available to be restaked. In fact, you could probably make an argument that considering the amount of ETH that's been staked hasn't really changed dramatically in the past few years, you could probably assume that as much ETH that's going to be staked is probably already staked, right? If you didn't already show up for the free money-a-thon, you're not going to show up for the free money-a-thon now. So we're probably already at a local maximum for the availability of ETH for restaking. So what does that mean for restaking protocols? Well, for restaking protocols, they are in a fight to the death, essentially, for TVL, right? Like a big premise is you want to have the most amount of economic security. Therefore, you kind of want the most amount of ETH. But they now compete with one another, right? And because they compete with one another, we can kind of expect a world where sooner rather than later, we'll have some sort of normalization on the amount of ETH spread across the restaking services, right? And that's because they'll give out rewards for ETH, and there'll just be some sort of incentive pressure to move your ETH somewhere else. It's very liquid, right? So at some point, we'll come to some sort of stasis. And what's going to happen is restaking services, which are already seeing this and already doing this, is they now need to compete also for the other sources of economic security. And as I sort of just mentioned, there's actually going to be vastly more economic security on top of Ethereum than Ethereum itself, right? And here's some like early examples, but if you think about it, there are many L2s which are very valuable, but Uniswap is more valuable than most L2s. They're actually turning on revenue. So now when you think about, oh, I would like some collateral to use as backing for economic security for my X, Y, and Z service, you'll say, I'll take ETH, but I'll also take Uni, because Uni is also very valuable, right? But then they're going to move on. They'll say, I'll also take ARB. I'll also take Wormhole. I'll also take Optimism. And you can expect in the future people are probably going to like turn these into baskets, right? There'll just be some sort of like basket of like collateral value that you can use in different things. So as these protocols compete, like restaking protocols compete, the protocols themselves under the hood, the DAO protocols, are actually the ones that kind of suffer from this today. And that's because DAO tokens are not actually compatible with staking, right? The ERC20 standard, how DAO tokens are used, the regulatory environment that these tokens are issued under aren't compatible natively with staking, right? They weren't designed for staking, and they also weren't designed for restaking, because the core utility of governance is broken when you use these tokens as collateral, right? The way DAO tokens high level work is you hold the token, you delegate to yourself or someone else. Because you hold the token, you have voting power. Well, if you stick this into EigenLayer, or you stick this into Symbiotic, or you stick this into Karak or any of the other services, that voting power gets captured by other layers. Happens with DeFi. Today, something like 168% of quorum in Uniswap is on Binance, centralized exchange, and DEXs, right? And this is long-term bad for DAOs because they're not able to properly set the parameters for security because so much of their protocol security tokens are sort of floating out in the ecosystem, sort of captured by third-party services, right? So the other problem here is that these tokens actually aren't fully actualized in their value. Right? Again, the price of these DAO tokens today is purely speculative. In some ways, you could kind of even call them a meme coin, right? Because it's unclear where the value comes from. But the problem that really extends here is that why would you hold long-term a token that is unproductive? Why would you hold an asset that is unproductive? There's better uses of your capital. And indeed, if you look at, the airdrop phenomena as kind of like a real microcosm edge case example of this, why do people sell their airdrops as soon as they get them? Well, because they think that this is the most this token will ever have a speculative price. Every moment after the airdrop, they expect the price to only go down, and why wouldn't it? These are unproductive assets. Any reasonable sane person would take their capital and move it to a productive asset as soon as possible. But imagine what it would look like if you got an airdrop and this token gave you a share of revenue of a super valuable DeFi protocol in perpetuity, right? It's sort of like if you think about, oh, you get a house that you can't live in and you can't rent. The most logical thing to do with it is sell it. But if someone gave you a house that you could rent, the most logical thing to do is just sit on it and clean up after guests and just earn that income on it, right? It's a productive asset. You would hold on to it. But airdrops really show how governance tokens aren't productive, right? And people exit the systems almost immediately because they recognize this and realize this. So the solution here, which is pretty obvious, and it's sort of like many protocols have tried this, and Uniswap is really leading the way today, is to enable staking for tokens, right? Which means allow DAO tokens, governance protocol tokens, to be used productively in their own ecosystem. And what we're building is a protocol that really standardizes the method for staking, because a lot of you in this room probably are thinking about staking in Lido style, right? There's validators and there's slashing and there's some sort of like third-party service you have to run. And that's actually not how it necessarily works for protocols that are fully on-chain, right? When they're fully smart contracts. You might think, okay, well, where's the slashing? And I would encourage you to think about it a little bit differently. In protocols that have governance, like Uniswap, the validators are actually the delegates, the people who are entrusted with operating the protocol. When they do a good job, the protocol grows, they earn revenue. When they do a bad job, the protocol suffers, and instead of being slashed, they simply earn less. These are actually kind of human validator networks, where these individual participants are the ones who are responsible for doing a good job and running these organizations, right? So the idea here is we're going to create a standardized method for staking protocol tokens because all of these DAOs have kind of different needs, right? Uniswap is a very specific kind of staking. Arbitrum's going to have multiple kinds of staking. Wormhole's going to have multiple kinds of staking. Basically, every protocol that you think of is going to have probably a unique way of staking, and we need to wrap that, right? The wrapping process also makes these tokens compatible with restaking. Because again, remember, there's another problem here, which is what happens to the governance power of your token when you put it into restaking. So high level, tokens have, governance protocol tokens, they've got this duality problem. They're both financial instruments and they are things you use to vote. And you can't really use them very efficiently in both ways. So what we need to do is we need to split the governance potential of a token from its financial use case, right? And that means that when you go and get some sort of yield on your token in restaking, the governance should remain accessible to the DAO, right? So the idea here is we're giving users full economic value of their tokens, but protocols get full control over their security. Because you can imagine a world where a protocol is so successful and the rewards from a third-party restaking service are so successful that 100% of a protocol's tokens are simply locked up in restaking. Because, you know, why not? That's the only place to actualize the value of your asset, right? And that destroys the protocol, right? So the solution here is the Tally protocol, which is what we're building. It's a lightweight Uniswap-like protocol that generates liquid stake tokens. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned earlier, these DAOs are all going to have different kinds of staking, right? Tally is building a generic Tally staker based on Unistaker that teams will be able to use, but we need to wrap anyone's kind of staking that they already have, right? And we need to create a standard interface for it so that you can safely put it into restaking services. The Tally protocol is aligned with the protocols themselves. What's interesting here is anyone could create an LST of a governance token, but the resulting governance token is actually owned by the DAO itself. Meaning, someone can come, press a button, and say, yeah, I want to create the LST version of Uni. Now they create it, and now the Uni token holders get to manage the parameters of settings for it. So you can kind of think about it like public infrastructure for protocol DAOs. What the users get is they get an auto-compounding LST token, right? Going back to the example of Uniswap, the way Unistaker works, you deposit your token into Unistaker, you wait a certain amount of time, you claim rewards. Now, during that amount of time, there's another thing that we're solving here with the protocol, which is basically the opportunity cost of participation. And when you stake your token into Unistaker, you now have a little weird opportunity cost because it's in your interest to claim your rewards as often as possible, right? But there's some increment of time short enough where the rewards are equivalent to the gas fee. So under the hood, the Tally protocol simply amortizes these fees across the entire pool so that the users actually get a liquid version of the token that just auto-compounds the rewards behind. This is kind of like classic DeFi summer, urine vault style thinking, right? On top of that, though, now we have another thing where we talk about Tally governance to manage the fees and operate protocol. Most people don't want to participate in governance. It's boring, it's complicated, it's a lot of work. There's tons of stuff in forums. It's not something most people want to enjoy. So what we're doing is when you create an LST version, when you come and you take your uni and you deposit it into the protocol and you get your T-uni back out, you can have a decision. You can delegate and vote as normal. The liquid version of the token works the same way as the underlying token. If you want to hold it and you want to vote, fine, that's great. But if you don't want to participate and you want to put your token into a restaking protocol or you want to put it into DeFi, the underlying protocol keeps your governance power. And the DAO is able to decide how to redistribute that voting power themselves. That's what I mean by the DAO actually owns their protocol. So you can imagine a world where, okay, this protocol is paying some sort of reward, 100% of the token holders stake their tokens because why not? You all want your share of the money of the protocol. Only 10% of the token holders actually care about voting and participating. Well, those 10% get to go do whatever they want with their tokens, but that 90%. That 90% of voting power that they have remains accessible to the remaining 10% who actually want to operate the protocol. And this is really important because the more people use and choose the liquid stake version of the governance token, the more security is returned to the DAO itself. So, probably I had a little discussion earlier where someone was asking, why would you want something like this? And it's actually pretty interesting why you would want this. Main thing is that really it's narrative aligned, right? This is probably the most convincing thing when you ask. Token holders want their asset to be productive. Otherwise, they don't want to hold it. You as a protocol want them to hold it. Your job is to make it productive. So in this case, what you can do is you can allow token holders to secure their own protocol infrastructure, right? You can create an aligned ecosystem that really multiplies their rewards. And this is what you can do with restaking and liquid stake governance tokens, right? I have this example. You stake in governance where you're basically paid to make your governance power available to the DAO and make decisions around how to use it. Then you get the liquid version, which you can now put into restaking. And let's take, for an example, an L2. L2s actually have lots of off-chain infrastructure that needs to be secured by some other solution. An example would be you can restake on sequencers, decentralized sequencing. You can get your LRT out of that, and you can restake that on data availability. There's a great example in Arbitrum where Arbitrum has a really large, successful L3 ecosystem. I think there's 50 or 60 L3s on top of Arbitrum today, and it's growing really fast. These L3s have several data availability options. They can choose a semi-decentralized data availability committee. They can choose Celestia. They can choose EigenDA, right? So they have 3 opportunities here for data availability. Well, the token holders say, why can't we have our own AVS ecosystem where the ARB token is providing the economic security and we get paid for providing the data availability for the L3s? Why not? Many people might say, well, oh, Ethereum has more economic security, which is true, but these things are already built on top of Arbitrum, which is secured by the ARB token itself. So now you have the Arbitrum community. I'm just using Arbitrum as an example. You have the Arbitrum community or any L2 ecosystem where you can say, hey, token holders, you can use your token to manage our governance and to restake on the external services that we use, right? And there's a lot of things that can be built in an L3 ecosystem, right? I put up some here, data availability, interoperability, oracles, all these type of things, right? So what the end product here is that governance tokens actually become valuable and useful You can build all this kind of new infrastructure that is aligned with the narrative, the token holders themselves, their own interests, and that is aligned with the protocol's interests because they want people to hold these tokens. No one wants to airdrop and see their token just jump off a cliff because nobody believes that these things have no value, right? We need to give them value, otherwise they don't succeed. And they don't succeed because when that token jumps off a cliff, it becomes trivially cheap to actually buy up the security of these protocols, right? So what is the market size here? This sort of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. What's bigger, Ethereum or everything that's built on top of Ethereum? And when we think about it, really it's all tokens. All tokens on Ethereum are effectively governance tokens one way or another. Even Ethereum in many ways is a governance token, right? And in the future, as we have more and more protocols, they are going to compete with one another on the viability of their tokens as an asset, right? This is how they win, how they maintain their own security. I mean, if I had a chance to give you a list of all the DAOs that have come and gone without offering their token holders value, it would go on forever, right? So what's going to happen is all protocol tokens are going to become productive. The Tally protocol is going to be a big piece of this. In many ways, we like to call this the Lido of protocol governance staking, because at the end of the day, it's actually the humans, and in the future, the AI, but I'm not going to talk about AI because it's kind of like a buzzword in this case. But it's actually the humans that actually come together regularly in governance calls and say, hey, let's allow list a new asset. Hey, let's change the parameters of the bridge. Hey, let's spend the treasury in this way or that way. And they are necessary to be incentivized to create correct decision makings to continue to operate these protocols and be successful. So the Tally protocol really aligns all the pieces in protocol ecosystems. The DAOs get security to operate their protocol. Token holders get value that they can exercise and use as productive assets. Everyone wins. And for the restaking services, there's an entirely new class of productive economic security that they can add to their protocols by simply offering token holders new opportunities. So yeah, fire hose of liquidity for restaking. There are a lot of protocol tokens out there, and there are a lot coming. So I think today, just on Tally only services a small portion of the market. Teams manage over 30 billion on the platform, right? There's an enormous amount of value out there. So sort of like winding it up, why is Tally building this? People know us as a DAO tool. Big question is like, why are you building this? And really the answer is that we're the right team to build this because we have the distribution and the trust and understand how DAOs work. The thing that I mentioned earlier is that what we're building is explicitly aligned with DAOs. The DAOs own their own LST. It becomes a new form of standard public infrastructure for their organizations, right? There's some stats about Tally itself. It's a DAO platform. We have over 500,000 users. People have transferred over $600 million in DAO proposals. That's actually hundreds of thousands of people who come together regularly to vote on things and agree to spend this money. And yeah, 30 billion protocol assets, right? So we can build the public infrastructure, and what's important is that we can turn it on for everyone all at once. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more, you can get in touch. You can scan the beautiful QR code. Yeah, that's a high-level overview of the Tally protocol.